Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 594. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about palm trees and miners, deserts and desperados, and of course, Joshua trees as we go to Joshua Tree National Park.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. There's going to be some news about the 2019 Amateur Traveler trip at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's talk about Joshua Tree. I'd like to welcome to the show Jeff Ohlfs, retired Chief Ranger from Joshua Tree National Park. And strangely enough, today we're going to talk about Joshua Tree National Park. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Chris. It's a real pleasure. I really do enjoy your podcast, so I'm happy to help contribute.
Well, thanks. Well, I was saying just before the show that you seemed like you're probably going to be the best guest I could get on this destination, and you told me that maybe there was somebody else, so I'm already starting disappointed.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's a dear friend, but I've got 26 years there, and I've hiked over 1,000 miles in the park, so there's very few
probably
people
going to do
than,
for us. I think we're probably okay. So where is Joshua Tree? First of all, I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with it. This isn't on everybody's map, whether they're in the United States or outside the United States.
Well, surprisingly, I think it probably is. There's a lot of people from all over the world that are coming to Joshua Tree for one reason or another. But it's in Southern California. Mm-hmm. It's a park that encompasses the Mojave and the Colorado Desert. It's about 2.5 hours east of Los Angeles or an hour east of Palm Springs, or 3 hours south of Las Vegas.
And that's 2.5 hours without traffic, because otherwise it's like 12, right?
Well, there's no traffic in LA. What are you talking about?
And we're closest to Riverside, San Bernardino, and then even closer to Palm Springs.
Correct.
Excellent. And why should somebody go to Joshua Tree?
Well, the primary reason is just for its natural beauty. It's just a stunning desert with the rocks, the Joshua Tree, the icon name for the park itself, which They say Dr. Seuss, the book The Lorax, was kind of patterned after. I don't know if we can ever prove that or not. So it's an iconic place.
Well, and for people who can't picture a Joshua tree in their head and don't remember the Lorax, can you describe what a Joshua tree looks like?
Well, Joshua tree is a yucca. It's technically not a tree. It's being a yucca, it's a fibrous instead of like a hardwood or a softwood type trees that most people are familiar with. And it grows up, and when the moth pollinates it, it splits and branches, and you get all sorts of these weird-looking branches that come up all over the place. But it is a yucca. They used to classify it till about 10 years ago as a lily.
Oh,
but then
wow. Okay.
Scientists changed their mind. So the name Joshua Tree, curiously, comes from, again, more rumor than in fact. It was the Mormon pioneers coming across on the Mormon Trail into California, first seeing these things. They thought it was Joshua pointing the way to the Promised Land.
Well, and what kind of itinerary would you recommend for Joshua Tree and for the vicinity?
A lot of people spend weeks here just in the park alone, but a couple days in the park, and maybe there's some things outside the area north of the park that people may not be familiar with that they would like to visit.
Well, let's start at the park.
The first thing for everybody to know that it's the 15th largest national park by acreage. It's just a little bit under, about the size of Rhode Island. So
I did not realize it was that big, and I've been there.
It's massive.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's 240 miles of boundary. If you were to drive Interstate 10, State Highway 62, and 177, which goes around the park on the outside, it would take you about 4 to 6 hours to drive that, just to drive around it. And so with that, there is no food, there is no gas, and outside of the campgrounds, there is no lodging inside the park. Before you leave any one of the gateway communities, make sure you're gassed up and you've got your snacks and your food.
And we're talking about a desert environment, so a appropriate amount of water depending on what season you're in there.
Appropriate amount of water. You want to have sunscreen, hats. A lot of people come out here to the desert. They want to hike in shorts. I do not hike in shorts, and I hike every week. Long sleeves, long pants, because everything out here is going to bite you, prick you, stick you, or sting you. And it's not all that bad. Don't get me wrong. It's just that it's a desert, and that's how these things survive. Most people have to realize that this is a home to the native wildlife and plants and animals. This is their home and it's protected. And to survive in the desert, they have to be tough.
Okay. Well, and you suggested we could spend a couple days in the park for the average visitor. A park of this size, we're not going to see everything. So where are you going to start us? Where should we go first?
As with any National Park Service area, you should always start at the visitor centers. And
well, we've got to get our
of them.
National Park passport stamped for one thing.
Yes, you must do that and get your brochure, and don't forget to stop and get the picture with yourself with the sign. But there's one in the village of Joshua Tree. There's one in the town of 29 Palms, and there's one at the south end of the park at Cottonwood Springs. But most people come to 29 Palms first, and that's where they head into the park through what we call the north entrance there. By the park headquarters is in 29 Palms. And they usually do a east-west loop. And, of course, if you start in Joshua Tree, you can do the west-east back to 29 Palms. But we'll just, for sake, go in through the north entrance. And basically, it's about a 25-mile drive from one entrance station to the other. They call it the Park Loop Road. And there's all sorts of – this is where you're going to see the iconic Joshua trees. You're going to see the rock boulders. Joshua Tree is the most popular rock climbing area in the world. That's one of its premier drawing cards. And if you're driving through this loop, you'll see individuals way up there like little ants on the side of a rock.
If we are a climber, is there a great spot where you would recommend either a beginning or an advanced climber go in Joshua Tree?
If you're a beginning climber, I'm not one for promoting a lot of things, but I would suggest finding yourself a guide to teach you just for the safety's sake.
Sure.
Because there is one law in this park that is strictly enforced, and that is the law of gravity. What goes up must come down. In my career, 26 years here, I've picked up a lot of people at the base of cliffs. So for safety's sake, if you're a beginner, please go with a guide first. But other than that, there are over 8,000 rock climbing routes inside of Joshua Tree. So pick.
I saw a lot of people climbing when I was there. I want to say in Secret Valley. Do I have the right name of that loop trail? Really nice loop trail coming off of the northern entrance.
You're either talking about Hidden Valley
Hidden Valley,
or
yes.
Okay, Hidden Valley, right.
Named
Hidden
after the
Valley.
salad dressing, yeah, okay.
Yeah. No, it was actually named after the old cattle rustlers. When they were stealing cattle from Arizona and going to California or stealing in California and taking them to Arizona, story is they used that valley to pen up the stolen cattle as they were passing through.
I do remember reading that, okay.
That is one area that, and I was going to suggest that there's a very nice little nature trail there just across the valley. And that's actually, that whole area there is called Lost Horse Valley. Another great story about an early day, one of those individuals lost his horse, and that's where he found it. So that's kind of how it got its name. There's also Barker Dam, which is across the valley there, and that has a really nice nature loop that takes you out to Barker Dam, which is an old cattle tank. Again, being a dry desert, lack of water, they made these, for lack of a better term, a dam. They just call them tanks that'll store water, and Barker Dam is one of those in the area, and you can take the hike out to there. Probably before you get there, though, you're going to cross Queen Valley and then come to the base of Ryan Mountain. Ryan Mountain is one of our higher peaks in the park. It's one of the few that actually has a trail to the top of it. Bit strenuous, so if you're not up for a good straight uphill hike, you might want to avoid that. But let me also state that Joshua Tree, unlike a lot of other national parks, and I can only think of a handful like Denali, you don't have to stay on trails here. You can go any place you want to.
Interesting.
That's what I do. I just pull off on the side of the road and I go take a look at that canyon and go, I'm going to go up there. I don't recommend that, though, for people who aren't used to cross-country travel, particularly in the desert. You want to be safe. We got over 250 miles of hiking trails inside the park. You're not going to be at a loss for anything.
Now, before we started recording, I think you said there's one place you can't go without a guide.
Correct. There are two restrictions actually in the park. One is a place I was going to mention. It's called Keys Ranch. Okay. Keys Ranch it's kind of like Scotty's Castle. Matter of fact, Bill Keys knew Scotty.
Scotty's Castle from Death Valley.
Death Valley. Bill Keys, the owner of the ranch, came here in the early 1900s. Quite a character. My wife is a native of the area, and she actually had met him, and I knew his son fairly well. This was their home until it became park property in the 60s. And it is left, basically, the ranch is an in situ museum. We're maintaining it and keeping the structures up, but there's no repairs in the sense of anything new going in there. The place is basically left the same way it was the day he died. And so it's you can go in there by guided tour. It's about an hour and a half tour, and right now I think they're giving them in the afternoons at about 2 o'clock, so everybody wants to check on that. You have to go to the visitor center first thing in the morning and buy right now I think it's a $10 ticket for an adult. On the day of the tour, there's no reservations except for showing up first thing in the morning and getting your ticket and meeting the guide at the gate. It's really quite a historic little ranch. Bill Keys lived out here. I mean, the nearest town was Beaumont and Banning, which is just before San Bernardino and Riverside. And that was almost a 2-day wagon ride for him. So he, his wife, the children that they raised there, they had a little market, they had an orchard, they had basically a little grocery store for any of the other miners and cattle ranchers in the area could come there. They even had the local schoolhouse there, not only for his children, but also the other children of the area. And that one-room schoolhouse is still there with the desks and the maps on the wall.
Interesting. We talked about going out on hikes, and you can enjoy Joshua Tree from your car, but you shouldn't, right? I mean, if you can get out and do it, you ought to go on one of these hikes. But what time of year would you recommend coming? I've been there in February. Very mild climate in February, but it's going to be a little warmer in the summer.
Yeah. Well, we're becoming, believe it or not, a year-round park. Get a lot of Europeans in the summer. The most popular time for people is the springtime with the spring flowers. And don't ask me how good it's good. The scientists have tried figuring out what's the recipe for the best time and the best blooms. And every year, I think Mother Nature decides to have them send them back to the chalkboard.
Meaning that, like, again, Death Valley, another desert park in California, that sometimes there are blooms in the spring and sometimes there are super blooms and wildflowers just literally everywhere.
Right. You're going to get blooms. Whether or not you get the super bloom is the thing that everybody wants to know about.
Is there a good month to see the wildflowers in general?
It all depends. I mean, I've got a tree. I'm right across the street from the park, and I've got some plants blooming right now. So with the weather crazy as it is, I don't think they know what time of the year it is. But it could be February or March. The one thing that I would caution people, if you really, right now, Joshua Tree, you've probably seen in the papers, they're telling people don't come. Go to other places. I'll kid you not, this park is packed on weekends with almost an hour sometimes, particularly on holiday weekends, wait just getting into one of the entrance gates.
Oh, my, wow.
You don't
Okay.
want to be here on holiday weekends if you can avoid it. And I'm not trying to scare people away, but it doesn't do any good if you're going to be here with thousands of other people. On a given day, it could be over 9,000 people in this park.
You see, I was there February midweek, and it was just, you felt like you had the park to yourself, so very different than
Exactly.
weekends.
Those are good times. And the other thing is what we used to call, well, I used to call it Hell Week. And that was the busiest time of the year for the staff at that park. And that's the Friday of the weekend before Easter to Sunday of the weekend after Easter. So it's a 17 days. So it's basically 2 different spring Easter holiday breaks on either side of Easter.
Okay.
And it's a zoo. Coming, like you said, March, late February, you should get even April after Easter, depending on when Easter comes. The other time of the year, too, if you're not really don't care about flowers too much, is come in the fall. It's really nice in between Columbus Day and Veterans Day. Still going to be busy, but not quite as busy. And actually between Thanksgiving and Christmas, if you get there right in the middle of that time, most people are not necessarily coming out then either. And the greatest temperature variance in the world is in the desert,
Right.
where you can go from a nice 80-degree day down to freezing at night. So please bring appropriate attire even in the winter. And Joshua Tree does get snow about once a year. We had 10 inches here one year just before Thanksgiving, which completely shut everything down because we don't generally have snowplows out here. And so just be prepared that winters are cold in the desert. Anyway, I mentioned Keys Ranch.
Right.
So on that loop road, there's a side road that takes you 6 miles up to a place called Keys View. This road was built by Bill Keys to access one of his gold mines. If you get a good day and it's not overly windy and there isn't a lot of, because if it's windy, you're going to get sand blowing and there's a haze in the air. But you can see all the way down to the Salton Sea, and you can see Signal Hill down in Mexico.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I was on a day I could see all that. I could see the Salton Sea, but I didn't know that I was seeing all the way to Mexico. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing from there is the San Andreas Fault, which you would have crossed if you were coming from L.A. to get to Joshua Tree. But there are displays up there. It tells you exactly where to look down on the fault line. You can also go visit it down there, too. A place called Thousand Palms is usually the most popular area.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Those of us who grew up in California or who've lived here for a long time are rather blasé about going to the fault, in the sense, not that we're not interested, but we're not afraid of going to the fault. For those of you who are coming from other places, he's not talking about something that's really dangerous to do. First of all, the odds of an earthquake happening when you're at the fault that is serious and dangerous are fairly low, but also, even if it does, you're probably still fine.
And as you know, I grew up less than a mile from the fault up by you. I sleep through earthquakes now.
Yeah. It's been literally decades since an earthquake has woken me up. So
just again, getting back to a couple of the hikes, a couple other ones. There's Wall Street Mill, which takes you out to Bill Keys's mill site for his mining claims.
Okay.
A more strenuous hike like Ryan Mountain, but a little longer than necessarily straight up, is out to the Lost Horse Mine, which is probably one of the largest old gold mines that we had. There are over 8,000 mining claims here inside Joshua Tree prior to it becoming a Park Service area. So mining was one of the things that was done from the 1870s all the way up until 1936 when the park was set aside. And that's the other thing, too. If you're out hiking cross country, please be careful of open mine shafts. With over 8,000 of them, there's still a few out there to be found. Okay. So just be careful where you're hiking.
And we're not recommending that if someone finds a mine shaft that they're exploring the mine shaft, I'm assuming.
No, it's actually it's against park regulations to enter any kind of mine adit or shaft, and they are dangerous. I mean, there's rattlesnakes, there's gas, everything. So that's kind of the loop road there. A few things to stop. You can have a nice picnic on that road.
I do have one more question about something on the loop road, and that's the Cholla Cactus Garden. Because I went there, and the reputation for Cholla cactus is that they are the jumping cactus, because you're going to go for this walk and you're going to end up with cactus on your shoes attached to it, and you're going to swear that they jumped off the cactuses onto you. I don't believe that's true.
To a certain extent it is. Unfortunately, that's not on the loop road. That was going to be day 2, where you drive from, again, if you're staying in the 29 Palms area, south towards Interstate 10 to Cottonwood Springs and Shereko Summit. Let me just state that you're going to pass Arch Rock, which is one of the few arch rocks like you might find in natural bridges as you head down to Cholla. But when you get to Cholla, the Cholla Cactus Garden is rather unique. It's right in that transition zone between the Mojave and the Colorado Desert, and it's just a dense area of cholla cactus. And they are called jumping cholla because people do think that they jump. And the reason that they think that it's jump is there is a fish barb hook on the end of that cactus.
Oh, yeah.
Which you cannot see with your eye. The human eyes just cannot see it. It's so microscopic. So people who I want to see how sharp that is, and they'll go sit there and they will try. And before they know their finger is not touching what they can actually physically see, they've actually embedded themselves. And the weakest point on that cactus is where the ball joint is. So when you pull your hand back, you pull off this whole ball of cactus, and then these people start trying to shake it off, and it's just now all of a sudden they got 5 more stuck into them from that same ball. It is also called the teddy bear cholla too, because people look like it's kind of, look at that, soft and cuddly.
Yeah, don't cuddle it.
Right, and we tell people don't touch the cactus and try to feel like. So that's the cholla. And just south of that is the ocotillo patch, which again in the springtime, the ocotillo is kind of a cactus. It's a spindly thing that goes up, and it greens up after every rain. It's just beautiful. But only in the springtime when it blossoms do you get the red, fiery blossom on the top of it. That's a good spot to also get out and walk around. Right now you're driving across the Pinto Basin, which used to be an old inland lake. And so you can see for 30 miles across the basin to the far end. Everything that you see there is inside the national park. And then you get down to the south end, what's called Cottonwood Springs. Visitor center there, there's a picnic area, campground. But the Cottonwood Springs itself is at the end of a little side road off that north-south road. And it's only a couple miles down from the visitor center. You park there and you get to this beautiful cottonwood away. I mean, those cottonwood trees, if they aren't some of the largest in the world, I don't know, but they're wonderful, and they're well protected because they also have the Washington fan palms amongst with them, so they don't get blown out of the way. That's been a stopping point for miners for over 100 years. The park has about 7 native fan palm oases, with park headquarters being the northernmost fan palm oasis. Stop, take a look at Cottonwood Springs, walk down into the oasis. You're prohibited from going actually into the oasis by the trail, but there's Indian mortars that you can see there and things. Is one of the few places in the park we advertise where those are located.
And when you say Indian mortars, these are ones that are in situ, where they're part of the base rock rather than something sitting up on top of the surface.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and then I would say drop out of the park down Interstate 10 and go 4 miles to the east to the little community of Shereko Summit.
Okay.
Now, I lived at Cottonwood Springs as ranger residences there for my first 4 years at the park, and Shereko Summit was an integral part of my life. The Shereko family, they're wonderful. I've seen it grow up from a little gas station, coffee shop. Now it's just huge. But it's a great place. The cafe there, carne asada on Saturday nights, and a General Patton or a Shereko burger for lunch. You can't go wrong there. But what's great there, too, is also the General Patton Museum.
Okay, I was going to say, you've got the General Patton thing there. Okay.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was just there on Veterans Day with the Shereko family. Like I said, they're really good friends of mine, and I love them dearly. What they've done to make this museum on behalf of General Patton, the troops that trained in the desert. And what it is the Army trained for the invasion of North Africa out here in the California-Arizona maneuver area. And Patton, although they're called the Patton camps, he wasn't here that much. He did fly over because he grew up out of Pasadena, so he knew about the desert out here, and he knew it would be a good training area for the troops with the desert environment of North Africa. And there's, I think, something like 13 of these camps all throughout the desert between California and Arizona. And Shereko was called Camp Young, and it was the headquarters camp. The Sherekos were already there. They knew Patton. The museum has lots of artifacts. There's tanks, all sorts of neat exhibits and things, not just particularly about the camps there for the training of the troops, but the military in general.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and that was the training for Operation Torch, if I remember my history correctly.
I'm a historian like you, but that's one I did not know the name of. So.
Got it, okay.
Well, that would be that day. Then getting back up to the 29 Palms area. If you want to stay in Indio, Palm Springs, that community too, you can do that. That's just an hour's drive up to the entrance of either the south or north entrance of the park. On the north end, we've got the town of Yucca Valley, the village of Joshua Tree, and the city of 29 Palms, which cater also in close proximity to visitors at the park. 29 Palms being park headquarters, again, we We mentioned stopping off at the visitor center there. That's the Oasis of Mara. It's one of the early Native American villages was there around that oasis. And, of course, that's where the town got its name from, was when the surveyor came through, he saw 29 palms, so he named it 29 Palms.
Okay.
My wife used to work in the visitor center, and people would go like, well, we saw more than 29 palms. Well, yes, nowadays there actually are. We're lost. Just outside of 29, still in the city limits, though, and the park, there is one place called 49 Palms Canyon. And it's about 1.5 miles. It's a good hike, easily doable for the average healthy person. If you have, again, problems hiking, I would not suggest going up there. But 49 Palms will take you up to another native fan palm oasis there. Again, maps are available at the visitor center. A couple other things, though, I want to mention 29 because it's now been my home for almost a couple decades now. The north side of the town is the 29 Palms Marine Corps base, the largest marine base in the world as far as geography is concerned. This is where they do all their desert warfare training. They do offer tours. I've been on a couple of them. They're very interesting. Every tour is different depending on what's going on. You need to do it by advance reservation, but they actually have villages out there that the Marines and Army and others train at. When they used to bring in Iraqi and Afghani nationals as role players there. And we would see them coming through town. They would be out there so that they get some real life experience on dealing with native speakers and that. So they can take you out to some of these villages. And they can show you, they're big on their archaeology, and desert tortoises out there are a big thing that they're trying to, since it's a federally threatened species. So they'll take you to their labs and things like that as part of their tours. And again, it all depends. So highly recommend if you have time to take a look at that. I want to give a shout out too to the Theater 29 Palms. Theater 29 is our local community theater. So if you're here on a Friday night, most months of the year, they have locals. I mean, it's not going to be a Broadway hit, but I'll guarantee you we've got some really good talent here. They can put on some really good plays. So that'd be something that you might want to do it in the evening. And I do not want to pass up the 29 Palms Historical Society, which I volunteer at one day a month. It's the old one-room schoolhouse. And although it's expanded over the years and became three rooms, but you can go see the layout of the one-room schoolhouse, and it's the Historical Society, and they have all sorts of exhibits there on the desert, the base, and the Native Americans and the people in the area. And it's really all volunteers. It's really nice, and it's free. During the fall seasons, Wednesday through Sunday in the afternoons, I would say stop in and say hello to the docents there. They one of the unique things that they do is they put on something called a weed show every year. It's usually the first weekend of November, and it's been going on every year since 1940. And it's kind of like a artist flower show. And the ladies of the town got together way back when, and they'll take just things. The criteria is dried stuff out of the desert, and they have various different categories, and it's really well done, and it's a great time of the year. Not to mention a few weeks before that, the second or third weekend, Saturday in October, is Pioneer Days, when a lot of the old timers who grew up here come back into town. It's kind of our annual parade. Yucca Valley has one too, but that's usually in May. But I'm a 29 Palms resident, so if you're out here in October, check out our Pioneer Day celebration.
Well, and you mentioned that you could also visit Joshua Tree from Palm Springs or Palm Desert. That's going to be a real different kind of experience. Now we're talking more of a resort town. And 29 Palms doesn't seem like it's anything like that to me.
Yeah, you're definitely going to be more in a more urban area down in Palm Springs and Desert Hot Springs or Indio or Coachella Valley. Some people do that and then they drive up for the day. If you're in 29 Yucca, there's lots of hotels. If you want a really unique experience, the 29 Palms Inn is over 100 years old. I know the family there. It's been in the family's hands. They have a wonderful restaurant. A lot of movie stars will stay there and have since the 40s. I had my retirement party there on the lawn of the inn. It's a great little place. All the cabins there are old mining shacks that were hauled down from the hills and the gold mines up above the town, and that's how it got its start. And so it's a very eclectic place. They also have a sister property called the Campbell House, which is a huge stone mansion that was built by the Campbells, who were the first archaeologists in the area. Their collection is not only at the Parks Museum, but also at the Historical Society, some of it.
Well, one thing we should mention in the area that you mentioned seeing from Keys View was the Salton Sea. And I'm not sure that everybody knows the U.S. even has something like the Salton Sea. So this is almost the U.S.'s version of the Dead Sea.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Prehistorically, it used to be the Gulf of California. Theoretically, came all the way up to Palm Springs, and
right.
If you're down at the Salton Sea, you can see the old shoreline. And there's actually a county park down south of India called Fish Traps, and it's the old archaeological. When the tides would come in, get high, the Native Americans built these rock rings, for lack of not rings, but half circles along the shore edge. And so when at low tide, and so when the water came in, the fish would be there, and then the water would go back out, trapping them in these little pools. And those half circle rock fish traps are still there at the Salton Sea. And so the Salton Sea, for folks, it used to be an agricultural basin. And back in the early 1900s, the aqueduct broke. I guess because of the railroad, I think it was punched into the aqueduct, and it flooded for years and created the Salton Sea. And it's very salty. They're cleaning it up. It historically has been a little more contaminated than it was because of agricultural runoff and all the salt and things like that. But it used to be a playground for the rich and famous from Hollywood. There were resorts along there and water skiing and all sorts of fabulous things along the Salton Sea. Now it's a great place for birding, and there's mud pots down at the south end.
Interesting. What else should we see when we're down in the Joshua Tree National Park area?
If you really want an adventure, go out to a place called Giant Rock. Giant Rock and it's just north of the town of Yucca Valley. It's the largest freestanding boulder in the world, although a chunk did fall off in 2000, so I'm not sure if it still retains that. But this area has a unique mystique to it. There's an old airstrip there. There was a gentleman by the name of Kreider, a German national, who built a house under this boulder. And when the authorities during World War II kind of came to question him, he actually blew himself up he had this home under this huge rock. But he had a friend out there by the name of George Van Tassel. And George was a test pilot for Howard Hughes. He's the one that created this airstrip next to Giant Rock. And this airstrip for years was used as a convention site for UFO enthusiasts. They thought it was a landing strip for UFOs. It's quite an eclectic history in that area. And George Van Tassel built a dome there called the Integratron nearby. It's a dome structure that was built without nails. And you can now still go inside there and have what they call a sound bath.
Okay.
It's with machines that rejuvenate you by sound waves being sent to you. Like I said,
it's not a lot of old episodes of Amateur Traveler, is it? Because that would be odd.
No, and I have listened to those.
Okay.
But the Integratron Giant Rock, it has a whole mystique area there, which is some people might be interested in that and don't realize that it's out there. Take a look at it. And if you're a flower person, there's right next door and across the street from Integratron is the Goobler Orchids. Now, they've been there since 1954. They grow orchids in greenhouses out here in the middle of the desert. And they have a festival every October, but they're open for people to come by and see all these beautiful orchids that they're growing there during the week. So one of the other things in the area that, if you're a serious four-wheel driver, I've got to mention this because it's a unique story, is Willie Boy's grave. It's up in the hills above Landers there. Willie Boy was a Native American who in 1909, he killed the father of the Indian lady that he loved.
Okay.
And took her and fled to the desert. His family was from the 29 Palms Oasis, which is where they had a village back in the day. So he fled there. It was called The West's Last Manhunt. And the sheriff's posse, Robert Redford did the film called Tell 'em Willie Boy.
Oh, vaguely, yeah. Yeah.
In 2009, it was 100 years since the last Western posse. And his gravesite, where he was either, depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of back and forth on whether he killed himself or the sheriff's posse killed him, or if it was even him and he lived to a ripe old age. But it's up there in the Ruby Mountains, and it's definitely a four-wheel drive, but it's a beautiful area. But the whole story about Willie Boy, President Roosevelt was coming to Riverside at the time that this posse was going on. There was security concerns for him, and so there's a huge story there with Willie Boy and part of the heritage of this area. So I encourage people to check out the story of Willie Boy.
And maybe Tell Them Willie Boy is Here before you go.
That's right. There you go. I've seen the film several times. I would not say it's 100% accurate, but it's Hollywood.
Oh my gosh.
So,
yes. I'm stunned.
So last day could be spent in a place just, again, the town of Yucca Valley, which is on the west end of Joshua Tree, is an old movie set called Pioneer Town.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was built in 1946 with Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. The Cisco Kid was filmed there.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a great place, eclectic little movie set.
The Cisco Kid TV show.
The TV show.
Okay.
Yeah.
I used to watch it, so.
So did I. There's one of the still operating bowling alleys there. Pappy and Harriet's is a local bar that's there. It's famous for its concerts on weekends. Matter of fact, Sir Paul McCartney, just showed up one night there in October of 2016 and did a short concert for the folks. So you guess you never know who drops in. It caused quite a traffic stir from what I remember from the sheriff's department, because everybody tweeted and started heading for Pioneer Town, and it's a 2-lane road getting up there. So it's a great place. On weekends, they have reenactments and shootouts and things like that on Main Street. So it's also fun for the kids. And maybe have lunch at Pappy and Harriet's or something, and then head down the hill back towards Palm Springs. And there's a new national monument that was created here a few years ago called Sand to Snow National Monument, and it's not in the National Park Service. Not all national monuments are. This one belongs to both the Forest Service and the BLM, run jointly.
The Bureau of Land Management.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
It's all right.
Sorry.
I know the jargon.
Government 3, yeah.
Little TLA
but there's
there.
Big Morongo Preserve is there, and it's on the south side of the highway. And there's a little nature hike around, and it's on stop in the migratory bird route. So there's some flowing water there in the trees, and it's a nice little canyon. So it's a great little place to see wildlife also. It was preserved. Now it's incorporated into the national monument. So it's a great place. I would encourage people to take a look and stop there.
Cool. What's going to surprise me when I go to head down to this area?
How beautiful the desert actually is. I was never going to come to a desert park in my career. I spent 33 years for the Park Service, and 26 of them ended up being here, because once I did finally get here, it was like, oh. Not to mention I met my wife here, and this is her hometown, but it does grow on you. At least 29 Palms, I'm real proud of being a resident.
Well, and if you're not from the West, I think one of the things that's really interesting in a park like this is the vistas. Just the fact that you can see for miles. You mentioned being on the highway here, and everything you see is part of the national park when you're in Pinto Basin. And I know when I went back east to go to school, I didn't realize what I was missing until I went and saw some movie. I think it was another Robert Redford movie, The Electric Horseman. And I saw these great big open spaces and went, oh, that's what it is I'm missing. And so that's one of the things I like about these Western parks. And very different parks, since we're talking about one of the few that is a desert park.
And it's totally different than Death Valley, too. So
right,
it's a completely different type of a desert, and even a completely different desert than Saguaro in Arizona.
Oh, right, sure. That would be one of the other ones. Yeah, exactly. Down in Tucson. Excellent. You're standing in the prettiest spot. Let's limit it to the park. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
Well, most people would probably say Keys View.
Okay.
For me, I think the most photographic for me, in a sense, was when I lived down in Cottonwood. It's at the base of Eagle Mountain. And I would sit in my backyard, and at sunset, I'd watch that Eagle Mountain change colors as the sun was going down. And anywhere in the desert, to a certain extent, we have some great sunsets out here.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Joshua Tree National Park.
Well, it doesn't happen often.
Okay.
But one day when I was working here, let me mention to you, during the summer, you have the monsoon season, just like you would in Arizona.
All right.
So be careful. So it's the flash floods.
Sure.
So you get these storms that hit, and an hour later, that water coming up in the canyons where it's raining is going to be coming down across that park road.
Right.
So one day we had a flash flood. And the water came down. I was working, that was the north-south road, keeping people from trying to cross the flowing water. Yeah. And along with those monsoons comes dry lightning. And so we ended up having a dry lightning strike up in Lost Horse Valley. So the Rangers were responding not only to this flash flood, but now we had this dry lightning storm. They'd started a wildland fire. And they don't go too far in the desert, a couple acres at a time.
Right.
But while we're doing this, our entrance station calls up on the radio and said, everybody, we just had an earthquake. So I would say having flash floods, a fire, and an earthquake all at the same time could only be in Joshua Tree.
Probably not in my visit, though, I'm going to guess. Excellent. And if you had to summarize Joshua Tree and the region in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Well, desert.
Yep.
Vastness.
Okay.
And mysterious.
Mysterious. Okay. Why
well,
mysterious?
You had the Integratron. You've got
that was
the UFOs.
Quirky, at least.
You got Giant Rock. People say they say UFOs inside the park. I didn't even mention Yucca Man. So our version of Bigfoot.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah, that's mysterious.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Jeff Ohlfs. Jeff, you don't currently have a website, as I recall, so we're not going to send somebody there, but thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your vast knowledge of Joshua Tree National Park and the region.
Thanks, Chris. It's been enjoyable. I'm glad I could help with adding another spot on your map.
In news of the community, I mentioned the 2019 Amateur Traveler trip. The 2018 trip has already been announced. That's to Central Europe, to Prague and Krakow and Budapest. The 2019 is going to be a little more expensive. That's one of the reasons I wanted to announce it sooner, because this is a trip to Peru and Machu Picchu. A little longer trip as well, and the prices will go up a little more from what they were this year. But that will be announced and available to start signing up for next week. And as always, that'll first be available in the amateurtraveler.com/trips group, the private Facebook group. So if you're really interested, sign up there. And then it'll go out on the newsletter, and then it will be announced in terms of the details of where you can get that information on the podcast last. What I'm doing there is I'm trying to give you some encouragement to sign up for the group and to sign up for the newsletter. I think that's pretty obvious. I heard from Artis on the episode we did on Albania relatively recently, and said Albania is an interesting and scenic country, but given my experience traveling there 2 years ago, I have to challenge her being the guest that we had. Everybody speaks English comment. In major cities, many do, but out in the country and small towns, not so much. Her bilingual ability lets her flip back and forth seamlessly for keywords/concepts, so it may seem to her that everybody speaks English, but it is not so, and that is part of the reason it is a great place to visit. Thanks so much, Artis. And with that, we'll end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com or leave them in the Facebook group, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. And as always, thanks so much for listening.